I'm not actually going to show you the film of Around the World in 80 Days. I'm sorry if that disappoints you. My job is to try and keep you awake after that lunch. Hopefully you've not had too much champagne and red wine, and you're going to stick with me as we travel around the world. We're going to do it in a little bit less than 80 days, I hope. I guess you hope as well. But that's the beauty of modern air travel. So Airbus is now 44 years old, which is actually quite a young company, particularly in this business. Our products generally last 30 years plus. So, having said that it's still a young company, it was also set up in a very political way. And there's no hiding the fact that the four home nations of Airbus, the UK, Spain, Germany, and France, were very instrumental in supporting the setup of Airbus. But things have changed. And we're now a new company with a new shareholding structure, and we have much more of a business orientation style. Having said that, there are lots of things that we have in our legacy of 44 years that we can't change. And one of those is that we have work split all over Europe. If you were setting up Airbus today as a new company, maybe you would decide, like they do in Seattle, to move everything into one place. Unfortunately, we don't have that luxury. But the fact we don't have that luxury, from an internationalization point of view, is actually an advantage, because we're very used to breaking down the work packages and then moving them around large logistical differences around the world. So internationalization is really in the DNA of Airbus. Even if we're quite young in terms of doing internationalization, it is part of our original DNA. The other thing to consider when looking at the history of Airbus is right about 1972, when the first aircraft from Airbus was sort of flying the A300, the world market was in the gravity of the world market for our aircraft is around about the mid-Atlantic, and that has shifted dramatically. And I don't know whether it was Kieran or John was saying that it's double the growth of anywhere else in the world is in China. And it's not just China. Asia itself is massively, massively growing. And that's pulling the center of gravity of aircraft sales and the aircraft market towards the Far East and away from the West. So we're going to do a bit of a journey today that follows that sort of process. We're going to chase after the sun as we go from west to east with a few examples. Airbus's global outreach really is based on some pillars, and those pillars are North America, the headquarters here in France in Toulouse where we are today, the Middle East, China, India and Japan. And it's not a surprise to see that that's where our major sort of sales offices are based. Those are the big sales offices that are there today. But as well as sales, you have customer support. As the fleet has grown, what we have to do is make sure that 24 hours a day, 365 days a week, or 366 if it's a leap year, we have to make sure that those planes stay flying and our customers are supported. So again, the pattern of our customer support facilities, be they just field service reps supporting the airline or logistical centres, spare parts centres, have pretty much followed that pattern. And then our industrial footprint, again, seems to follow a similar pattern. And our industrial footprint includes things as diverse as engineering centres, Russia, India, USA, China, to name a few, as well as joint ventures in terms of manufacturing, and also big facilities for manufacturing, which now include final assembly lines. China has had an assembly line now for a few years. They've delivered over 170 aircraft from China, the China FAL, and it's very, very successful. Those aircraft go into service extremely well. And that's a model that we are now copying and pasting to the United States of America. And I'll talk a little bit more about the United States later in the presentation. Why do we have to be global? We're 44 years old, and until I guess about 10 years ago we were not really that global. We were pretty much a European company. So why the change? Well, part of the change is to access the strategic markets. We don't hide away from that, and the strategic market is moving to the east, as I explained earlier. On top of that, though, as these economies develop, particularly in the east, it generates an industry, and it generates a very competitive industry. So as well as doing it for strategic market access, we also are constantly seeking new suppliers, new skills, new technology. And again, the other thing is natural hedging. Natural hedging means that we in Europe, Airbus as a company has somewhat of a disadvantage against our American friends in Boeing. And that is that they're all based in dollars. We have euros in our home nations, or pound sterling if you're from the UK like I am. But essentially we're victim to things that we don't control, which is the exchange rate between dollars and pounds, euros. So the more we spread our work around the world, the more we naturally hedge against that dollar fluctuation, because different currencies will move at different rates against the dollar. Another interesting aspect that has come to a sort of recent light, and India is a really good example of this in the offshore engineering centres in India, is we're able to grab natural talents. Talents that are becoming more and more scarce in Europe, particularly engineering. Engineering is seen to be a less attractive sort of thing for graduates to go to, and engineering industry and manufacturing industry is not as exciting maybe for some young people as it used to be. That's in Europe, but in the rest of the world engineering has a very, very high profile, and there's some great skills and talents that we can capture from other parts of the world. We also do it to gain access to raw materials. Some of the raw materials we use in aerospace are quite exotic, and we make sure that we can keep and maintain the supply of those raw materials. And Russia is one example of that, where 60 to 70% of our titanium comes from Russia today. And the last one, which is more of a recent one and has become particularly prevalent since the crash in the EU and America in the financial crisis, is to gain financial resources. That's both to develop our programs in the future, be it an A330neo you were talking about, or be it an A380neo, or the next generation Single. It takes a lot of money, and that money is becoming increasingly difficult to tap into. We don't have the luxury of Seattle, where they make, I don't know, 8.7 billion just comes cash in hand. Nobody in Europe will pay that sort of money. And when they do pay that money, you have to pay it back. So we have quite a disadvantage in terms of financial resources. So around the world now, we're trying to grab financial resources both to develop our programs and also to make sure we support our customers in being able to purchase the aircraft that we're making. Because it's Innovation Day, I had to throw a bit of innovation into the international cooperation theme. And John talked about two things. He talked about the duopoly and the fact that we're in the lead. And it's often reported that Airbus is in the lead, Boeing is in the lead. This year it's this year it's that. It's either number of sales or number of deliveries. The reality, though, is it's a duopoly. And it's around about 50-50. It's a very, very unusual market. And for the last 10 years we've lived in that. And that shapes your behavior. It shapes the way that you develop products and the way that you market the products. And the duopoly is coming to an end. Is it 5 years? Is it 10 years? Is it 20 years, as John said? I can't really predict. It's probably closer to the 20 than the 5. But the fact is, it is going to end. And when you think about the sort of industry we are in, you have to think long term. It's no good thinking what's going to happen in the next 2 or 3 years. You have to be thinking a little bit more in the future. Should we be afraid of the end of the duopoly? No, I don't think so. We have a very good product range. We're very well positioned in the market today. And we have something that most of the other people who are coming into our market don't have. We have a very diverse cultural background. There is 52 nationalities working for Airbus in this site, this area alone. We are a very diverse culture with 44 years of experience of managing different cultural differences and different languages. And that gives you diversity. That gives you innovation. The fact that you approach a problem in a completely different way depending on your culture means that your problem solving has maybe a longer cycle, but generally comes out with such more and more innovation and an innovative solution. So how do we do internationalization? Well, it's not just as easy as going to a country and a country saying, okay, we want to build aeroplanes or building aeroplane parts, which is generally where the conversation starts. We have to balance the opportunities of that in terms of either being market access or competitiveness with the risk that that develops for our supply chain. You take an A380, there's around about 4 million components in an A380 from around 1,500 different suppliers from 30 different countries in the world. Quite frankly, when I walk around the final assembly line, I still, and this is after 30 years, I still think it's a minor miracle that all these parts come together to make a flying machine that will go on time to the customer. And you can't just say it's about complex components either. You know, sometimes we do complex components, sometimes we do simple components, but it doesn't matter what the component is. It can be a nut and a bolt. And if that nut and bolt is missing, it's not available because we've outsourced it to a country that was not ready to do it, and it's not available for the final assembly line, the aircraft is not available for the customer. It will stop the production. And you know, you think I'm exaggerating? Look at the 787 program. It was stopped for several months because of nuts and bolts. It is as simple as that. Very often internally when I talk about cooperation inside Airbus, everybody thinks about aerostructure manufacturing and setting up factories for final assembly lines or aerostructures, but that's not actually true. When we look at a country, we look at what the capability is, and we look at what the aspiration is, and we look at some of the problems that that country may have in building its aviation industry up. Because if that country has a problem building its aviation industry, we have a problem delivering the products into it. So we take the whole scope, and it can be anything from raw materials, it can be aerostructures, it can be final assembly lines, which is great for press headlines, but it can also mean things like training for pilots, training for air crew, and things really diverse. We're starting to now think about how do we deal with our aircraft at the end of its life. After 44 years, some of our products are reaching the end of their life. And we want to make sure that what we do with those aircraft is environmentally sound. When we break those aircraft down into spare parts or back into raw materials, that we do that in an environmentally friendly and professional way. As I said, we're a relatively young company, and in 2006 we were very orientated toward Western Europe and a traditional aerospace market or industry like North America and the EU. In Asia, we had around about 2% of our outsourcing. So of the 27 billion, only 2% was in Asia in 2006. By 2012, around about 11% of our sourcing is in Asia. Then the rest of the world has also increased. The other thing that is interesting about this slide is there is no losers. Because the total volume of aircraft has gone up so dramatically, from 27 billion to 40 billion of sourcing, everybody has got an increase. But what you can see is the trend to move towards Asia and rest of the world having a fairer share of the cake in terms of manufacturing. By 2020, this is a very conservative estimate, Asia will be around, I don't know what the percentage is, but you can see the trend is probably around about double. And the rest of the world is also growing. And again, the bottom line number, 60 billion US dollars, means everybody is a winner. There are no losers. And sometimes this is quite difficult to explain to our home countries and sometimes our own internal people that internationalization does not necessarily rob you of jobs. Internationalization creates jobs for everyone, because the more we do it, the more market we secure, the more share of the cake that we have to spread around. So So fasten your seatbelts, we're going to go and travel around the world a little bit faster than Jules Verne. I've only picked a few examples, so I'm really sorry. There's lots of different countries in the room. If I don't cover your country, I'm really sorry. I've just picked a few nice examples. The first example is South Africa. And South Africa was a fairly typical country that we did internationalization with. And we started with small detailed parts. Sounds simple. There's no design work, you just make the part as this process says. But this was 600 part numbers. So to manage 600 part numbers is quite difficult. And particularly when you think, I mean, there's probably some people from Africa in the room, but those who aren't from Africa probably think there is no aerospace industry in Africa. There's another reason why I picked this slide. Because what they did, they took that very simple component and they moved on. And they developed niche manufacturing processes. And one example of that is in a very small company. I say very small, it employs upwards of 500-600 people, maybe more. And they produce all of the track cans. You can see the thing behind me. It's a green lump. It sits in the wing. And this green lump, the track can, it separates the mechanical working of the wing from the fuel tank. So it's pretty important. And they have also developed a process which is welding. There's very little, if any, welding on an aircraft. Okay, this is the only part I know. I'm not a total expert on every part in the aircraft, but this is the only part I know that is welded on the aircraft. And they produce them for just about every single aeroplane inside the Airbus fleet. This is sole source contract in South Africa because they have developed that technology. South Africa embarked on the F400M program, and the F400M program comes into a theme a little bit later in another country as well. One of the nice things about working on the F400M program and doing design packages on the F400M program is it's the same processes, the same tools and the same techniques that we use to design commercial aircraft. So if you can design parts for A400M, it is not a big step to switch to designing parts into the commercial field. And this has given a few countries a good stepping stone into getting into commercial aircraft design and risk-sharing packages. It's given them a step up the value chain. And South Africa always surprises me just how innovative South Africa is, and the African sort of culture is really very innovative. And one of the great examples they have is most of that titanium raw material in the West, so excepting Russia, comes from South Africa. They dig it out of the ground. It's actually the fourth most common mineral in the world, but most of it sits in South Africa. But they cannot process that. They do not have the technology, the energy, and the resources to turn that raw material into a raw material that Airbus can use. So they've developed a process with a laser to do 3D printing of finished titanium components. That process is now going through process validation for aerospace. And the other nice thing about it is aerospace is the tip of the iceberg for that sort of industry. So when you do these projects and you do these technological developments in a country, you don't just get aerospace components, you're able to tackle lots more market, biomedical, sports. You imagine, this is like the Star Trek replicator. Whatever you want, you go and ask for in a 3D CAD model and it produces it very, very quickly. Any shape, any size, your imagination is really only the limit. Turkey, for me, is an aerospace romance. Turkey was my first country that I looked after when I started this job, around about 2004. And yes, the spike had something to do with me in 2004. They started building a partial rate of a sub-assembly. Not that big a package, not too small either. But by 2010, 2011, then they signed a contract to be the single source supplier of that product. And by, I think, this year or next year, they will supply every single sub-assembly for the A320 program on the Section 18 fuselage shells, which is no small thing when you think, I can't remember what the backlog number that John showed, over 4,000, nearly 5,000 aircraft. So for a long time now, we're tied to Turkey for this component. Turkey also got involved in the A400M, and they were very, very quick, quicker than most, to take that learning and that skill base and get themselves onto the A350 program. And they're the single source supplier for the A350 ailerons, for the 900 and the 1000 variant. So, for me, I've gone from an aerospace romance to a marriage or a long-term partnership with Turkey. And I actually spend a lot of time in Turkey still. And last week I had the pleasure of being in Turkey to see another factory opened. It's a wiring harness factory from one of our suppliers, and that's gone from, in 4 or 5 years, from 50 people and is now rising to 400 people. So very quickly these countries are coming up to speed, developing employment and developing high-skilled jobs. Abu Dhabi is a good adventure to go on. I remember going to Abu Dhabi the first time just before 2008 and being walked out into a desert. There was nothing there. And being told, we want to build a factory here, and this factory is going to end up one of the top 10 aerospace companies in the world, or top 10 aerostructure suppliers in the world, and we're going to do it. I thought that was an amazing part of courage and vision, but actually when we started to build a business plan and they went and sought some partnerships around the world, they managed to get an Austrian company, Fischer, to help them. And they had the money and they built a factory. But building a factory in the desert, anybody can do. Okay, if you have the money, you build a factory. So that's empty shell, it's not that difficult. Where it becomes difficult is when you have to develop the skills in the country and actually deliver the parts. And we were so amazed and committed to this supplier, and this supplier was so committed to us, that we actually spent of our own time and money 15,000 hours training their people to bring them up to speed between us and the industrial partner Fischer. So we ended up with the infrastructure, the people, the methods and the process, and we started delivering parts. In 2012, there were about $100 million a year turnover, which is not bad. You consider it was a desert in 2008 to $100 million turnover by 2012. So 4 years. And now they're working on growing that. Certainly in the next few years, and certainly before 2020, they'll have grown at least another 20%. And they still have the aspiration to be in the top 10. And they're coming up the ranking quite fast. But having said that, for me, the most amazing thing about this story is the guys in Abu Dhabi, in Strata, who had the vision to stand in that desert and make Airbus understand that their vision was real, that they could really pull it off. So I have to say all credit to Strata for having their vision of a new technology in 2008, because when I stood in that desert, it seemed like a big challenge. Another example of cooperation, and we're moving rapidly east now, is South Korea. South Korea is literally the wind beneath our wings these days. Whilst they do fuselage components as well, the majority of their work is on the wing program. They are starting to do all of the bottom skins for the NEO program. And they also do the ribs for the 330 and the 350 program, and they are the sole source supplier for sharklets in the world. But what really is striking about South Korea is two things. One thing is how professionally they take this work and turn it almost without a problem into a seamless supply chain of Airbus. And the second thing is the sheer rate of growth. Basically, 2011, you can see around about $100 million turnover in South Korea for Airbus. By 2020, $500 million. So it's a rapid growth. And that is confirmed contracts, confirmed programs. That's a minimum of what they will achieve. If you think South Korea is spectacular, then China. In 2004, Airbus had 27% of the market share. by 2015, and it's arguable that we're maybe there already, we have around about 50% market share. And we know that's going to happen because of the backlog. 2015 is around the corner. How do we do that? Well, part of it is having good products and having a good relationship with the Chinese. But you don't get a good relationship with the Chinese unless you give something back to their industry. China has big aspirations in the aerospace industry. There's some question about China and Russia getting together to build twin-aisle aircraft. The aspiration in China is very, very strong. And if you really want to play in the China market, you have to play with them. You have to give something back. And Airbus has done quite a lot. If you think about China, China is up until very recently, the only place in the world where a major component assembly, what we call a major component assembly, so fully equipped, systems installed, major structure, and in this case it's the wing, which I'm from the UK where we make wings, so I always think that's the most important thing. Without the wings it doesn't fly. China makes 4 shipsets of wing a month today, and has done for a while. And they've made around about 170 shipsets of wing, almost seamlessly. The next step really for us was the final assembly line. Again, it's the only place in the world today outside of Europe where Airbus has a final assembly line. Was it problematic? No, it wasn't. It actually went extremely smoothly. 170 aircraft delivered today to a very, very good quality standard. A standard that is as good as Europe. In the future, will we do more in China? Yes, we will. If you think by 2015, we will comfortably make 500 million US dollars turnover. By the way, when we were 27% in our market share, 2004, we had virtually no work at all in China. By 2020, we will exceed $1 billion turnover in China. That's a huge growth. So, Airbus being European, we get lots of positive messages from China and Korea, and let's come and invest. And one place where we seem to have a very up and down relationship is the United States of America. The United States of America, are we the enemy of the United States of America? Is Airbus the enemy of the United States? Does Airbus destroy the United States aviation industry? Well, last year we spent $12 billion in the United States. $12 billion. I don't know how many jobs that creates in the United States, but I wouldn't have time to go and add them up if I tried. And as well as having $12 billion, we also have our own facilities. In the United States, we have 2 engineering centers employing 600 or over 600 engineers. We have the second largest training center in the world for Airbus outside of Toulouse, with 7 simulators. And the volume of sourcing continually grows in the US. And the US has joined that exclusive club of doing major component assemblies with China. On the A350, Spirit will produce a fully equipped Section 15, and that will bring to a peak, or the highest point so far, an all-time high, the spend of Airbus in Americas. And all of that before we build the final assembly line in Alabama, a state that has been hit by high unemployment, hurricanes, oil spills. This is a state that's not had much luck. But it's a state that has given Airbus an enormous amount of moral support in building a final assembly line. The factory is almost complete. We're going to production middle of next year. And by 2016, the first aircraft will roll out of the United States final assembly line. And the United States is then on a par with China, having its own FAL, it's doing major component assemblies, and it has $12 billion of our money every year that we spend there. So do we see the United States as an enemy? No. Does the United States see us as an enemy? You have to ask them. Internationalization, is it inevitable? Well, there's a Japanese guy whose name is really difficult for me to pronounce, but I'll have a go. Kenichi Omahai, I think is the name, came up with a triangle of power. It was in the early 80s. And he said, if you want to be a global company, you have to be operating in these three economies, the United States, Europe, and Japan. Well, for us, the world has always been a little bit more complicated than that. And certainly by the turn of the century, I think no one would disagree that you have to be at least in India and China as well. And for us, even that was not enough. You have the Middle East in there as well in that play. Airbus, if I was to draw this picture for Airbus, it'd have more points. And in the future, is it going to get simpler? No, I don't think so. I can't tell you what countries are in there. My crystal ball doesn't work quite as well as John Leahy's and Kieran's crystal balls. But I do know that it is going to get more complicated, and there will be more countries. So is internationalization inevitable? Yes, I truly believe internationalization of Airbus is inevitable. It's not going to go away. So that's the end of my presentation. Thank you all for staying awake. No one was snoring. And if you have any questions,
thank you.